Okay, chapter 11 of the NASM 7th edition, Certified Personal Trainer Certification Workbook. Chapter 11 is on health, wellness, and fitness assessment. So here we start into a really important part of the textbook, which are the fitness assessments. And we're going to start off here in chapter 11 with the basic introduction. Again, the learning objectives are good to read through, give you that little general overview of what's expected or what you should be learning in the chapter. As always, paper, writing implement, something so that you can take notes and be effective in your studying. So chapter 11, health, wellness, fitness assessments, basic introduction on the importance and purpose of assessments. You know, you got to take a step back and remember that fitness assessments are really important because they do the things that you see here on page 343. Identify individuals who are at increased risk for any sort of physical issue, but in particular cardiovascular, musculoskeletal, pulmonary, respiratory, things like that, metabolic disorders. So that's the purpose. And of course, there's some bullet points here that are really important to know. Ultimately, you can use assessments in the real world. What we talk about is that assessments, they give us this information about the client. And more importantly, at some point, it's very motivating for clients. So fitness assessments really ultimately become almost like the driver, one of the drivers for intrinsic motivation, which we spoke about already in the previous chapter. So purpose of assessments and what we call the pre-participation screening. So normally the way you work this with assessments is you start off with a pre-participation screening, a PAR-Q, as we call it, or the health risk assessment, and then move into the health risk assessment itself. So there's a number of different ways we're going to access information, and the very first thing we do is what's known as a pre-participation screen. In other words, you come in to train with me. I'm not going to just go ahead and start training you and having you do bench presses. I got to make sure that you're prepared to even exercise and at what level you're at to exercise. So we need to know certain things, what we call biometric data, to help us not only determine how ready or where you're at from a training perspective, if you're even ready to train, and then at what level are you at, so that I can design the program appropriately for you. So the pre-participation screening is the health risk assessment, and it's just a questionnaire. And on page 345, you'll see a sample PAR-Q, physical activity readiness questionnaire. That's what the PAR-Q, that's what it's called. And that's really designed to begin this process and ask some questions, get some information. And you can read through, of course, figure 11.1 is this sample PAR-Q. And NASM, of course, has their own PAR-Qs that you can obviously use with your clients. There's no real standard with PAR-Qs. They're getting, with all the NCCA accredited organizations, they're becoming more and more similar in the questionnaires, but it just depends on where you work. For instance, some organizations have their own PAR-Qs, but the general concept is that you want to have a tool, an assessment that allows you to screen a person before they actually come in and start training with you. That's what the PAR-Q does. Health history questionnaire is the next step. So we do a PAR-Q, has basic questions. If you answer no to all these questions in the PAR-Q, we can move on to the training. For instance, if you answer yes to one or more, and again, some PAR-Qs have 3 or more in a health risk assessment. In this case, NASM has it so that you would know, like a flow chart. You know, if this happens, you go here. If this happens, you go here. And that's how this works. So the health history questionnaire then is a questionnaire that are very targeted and very pertinent to actual health history, hence the name of the questionnaire. So that's going to have questions related related to the age, by the way, private information, age, gender, height, weight, physician's name, and emergency contact. So that's information that's considered private and confidential. But the health history questionnaire is going to then, and by the way, you're going to have this now broken out. The health history questionnaire is going to be more intensive, invasive, so to speak, into a client's actual lifestyle and habits. So page 346 begins with lifestyle habits. Not a lot to memorize per se in this area right here. However, it is explaining to you why these particular topics are important. So within lifestyle habits, it's really important. By the way, you're not just filling this out, having a client fill it out, and then you're putting it somewhere. The goal of this health history is for you to literally read it and get a really good idea of what your client's lifestyle is right now, because their habits are going to define a lot about whether or not they're going to achieve or have the ability to achieve the goals that they want to achieve from fitness sessions, excuse me, and training. So what are their lifestyle habits? What are their exercise habits? Are they exercising or aren't they exercising? What are their dietary habits? Of course, this is where we're probably going to see, most of the issues and problems. And so you'll be finding out if they exercise, if they don't, what are their dietary, what are they eating? You can actually have it completely, if you wanted to, you can actually have a completely separate form just on nutrition. What are their sleep habits? What about stress? What are some of those points in their life that really put a lot of stress on them? Their work, their job, whatever that case is, these are things you want to know, because remember, stress has a profound effect on your physiology. What do you do for a living? Occupation, right? What's the nature of what they do? How does that affect either the training routine, the way they eat? Look, you know that if somebody's working nights, that's hard. That's hard on the body. It can have an effect on their cortisol level release, things like that. Are they under a lot of stress at work? Do they work a lot of hours? Those are the things that you're going to find out here. Recreation and hobbies. It's not a bad idea to get an idea of knowing what your clients' hobbies are, because it could be that you can actually implement cardio training a little bit more into their hobbies if that particular hobby affords that. Then medical history. This is critical. You've got to know past injuries, particularly related to joints or issues. Do they have an ACL tear? Did that happen 5 years ago or 10 years ago? And obviously, things like this, you're going to have to then go back and talk with some information from their clinical practitioner. Ankle sprains, knee injuries, right? Low back issues, not just low back pain, but injuries. That's what we're talking about here. Past injuries. Some people just have low back pain because they're in poor physical condition. And so that's the difference. You want to know if they had a low back injury. Did they have any of their intervertebral discs removed, and they have a fused discs in their lumbar vertebrae? Those are the things that you need to know, and that you'll then use to help decide how you're going to move along or begin their programming. Did they have any past surgeries? What chronic diseases do they have? Now, keep in mind, when we talk about these chronic diseases, medical history, we're talking about clinically diagnosed, okay? Somebody that comes out and says, well, I think I may have diabetes. No, you don't think you have diabetes. You either have it or you don't. You have prediabetes or you don't. When I ask clients about their medical condition, I want to know what a physician actually told you have. Well, I have high blood pressure. Okay, hang on a second. Has a doctor told you that you've been diagnosed with hypertension? No, but I take my blood pressure on my own, and it was 130/84, and I got to go, whoa, slow down a second. It's not It's not a diagnosis unless a clinician makes it a diagnosis. Go to your doctor. Have the doctor clinically diagnose it as hypertension. That's just a for instance. What meds are they on, right? Again, these are the things that the health history form gives you. Now, so once you have that information, now you can move on to conducting the actual health and fitness assessments. So there are a couple of things to keep in mind when we do the actual assessments. Remember, those are screening tools. A screening is a way prior to an actual assessment to get an idea of where that individual is at. So we do the screenings. Now we can do the actual the actual assessments, and that's going to happen after you do the health risk assessment. If they don't require any other medical clearance, you can consider, now moving forward with these actual assessments. There are some considerations that you're going to need to think about, and there are a couple of figures that are really important here on page 351, and this is what's relevant: appropriateness, validity, and reliability of these assessments. Read through those and make sure you understand and appreciate that information. Same thing with the termination of an assessment. You got to keep in mind that, excuse me, when you start doing some assessments, you're going to be doing cardio respiratory fitness, you're going to do body fat, you're going to do a couple of different things. Some of them don't require any physical output, others do. And so there's an appropriate sequencing that you're going to use when you do this. But you're also going to have to remember that when you're doing a basic assessment, which is just a test, you can't do it and have people, going into respiratory distress, for instance. You got to know when to stop the assessment if needed. And that's basically what we're going through here in these next couple of pages. So assessment sequencing, it always starts with the non-physical assessments, such as body weight, calculating BMI, body fat caliper testing, circumference measurements. Think about, I would think that that's intuitive, that anything that does not involve, step ups, the YMCA 3-minute step test, the Rockport walk, any of those will always come after you take a person's blood pressure, because I want resting heart rate to be true resting heart rate. I want my blood pressure to be resting blood pressure. If I've just done out of sequence one of the cardiovascular assessments and then I sit you down, well, I'm going to have a skewed measurement, and so we don't want to do that. So it's really simple. You start off with the most basic non-energy requiring assessments first. Safety, legal implications. Of course, this is important that you have a defibrillator wherever you're at. They are not required by law, but they are just required by common sense. I'm not sure there are many places now, health and fitness centers, personal training studios, that don't have AEDs. It's not a bad idea, and you have to know how to use them. You also must be CPR certified. It's always a good idea to get the additional first aid with that. So exercise test termination criteria, and that's a listing here, like I said, on figure 11.3. So the other thing to keep in mind are the instructions. You should, when you're doing a fitness assessment, remember to tell your client or give them instructions about what you're going to be doing. And that's what the pre-assessment instruction, that's what that paragraph is saying. Just make sure you're telling people, look, here's what we're going to do. This is what's going to happen first. I'm going to do this, this, and this, and then we're going to terminate with this and this, and we'll be done. And then we'll move on to the next assessment. And so here are and then as we move into page 353, here are the fitness assessment protocols. And you have a list of them: heart rate, measuring heart rate, blood pressure. And we talked about this in a previous chapter. Heart rate should be done with the client seated. You can take heart rate with the pulse. Again, normally the recommendation is, if you can, use a heart rate monitor, but the easiest, quickest way to do it is to take the pulse, either radial ulnar or the carotid, and then you can get their heart rate. You can count for 10 seconds, and however many times it was beating for 10 seconds, you multiply that by 6. That gives you the number of beats per minute. You could feel how many beats happen in 6 seconds, right? And then you would multiply it by 10 to get 1 minute, right? So 60 beats per minute, 70 beats per minute. You could also literally sit there and count it for 60 seconds if you wanted to. You could do that as well. Blood pressure, of course, use a blood pressure monitor that is most convenient. Look, if you can use the stethoscope and the blood pressure monitoring devices that you have to listen to, they tend to be pretty accurate, but you as the technician have to be pretty good at it also, because you got to actually hear when the last thudding occurs in the stethoscope. So that takes some practice, and because trainers for the most part don't have that experience, this is why we opt for the machines that you can either put on your wrist, right? And you've seen those. You put them on the wrist, press the button, and you just sit there, and it squeezes it and gives you a reading. Fairly accurate. Got to make sure the battery is not dying. There are also cuff automatic cuffs that you put on, press the button, and it will basically do pretty much exactly what a manual stethoscope method will do as well. So just keep that in mind. So that's blood pressure, and again, the idea is that if you do it, palpating it like that, it's just easier to do it on the wrist versus coming up and doing it on a person's carotid. So you would do it literally, but look, in today's today's day and age, just use the cuff. I mean, that's what I use. Have one at home. I mean, I use it for anything, and as long as I keep the battery, the fresh battery in it, it's pretty consistent and accurate. And so it also gives me my pulse. So I get blood pressure and pulse pretty much at the same time, and I take care of having to do any palpation on a client. So, and now we move into table 11.1. You've seen this. It's a good idea, good opportunity to redo and make sure you know these numbers. And it's probably helpful to kind of show you again the issue that we have with the new guidelines is the less than or equal to sign. So normal blood pressure is no longer 120/80. It's below 120/80, which means it's 119/79. That is the ideal blood pressure. Okay, 119/79. At 120, as soon as you hit 120/80, you are, you're elevated, and even then, by the way, it's 120 to 129 over less than 80. So technically, again, this is where it can get confusing. Technically, that is elevated. Okay, that's elevated. You'll notice how the diastolic number, that's 79 in this chart, is still less than 80. And that requires lifestyle changes. As soon as either the systolic or the diastolic go into the 120 and above range, you are in stage 1 hypertension. That means a lot of us just went from being normal to being stage 1 hypertensive, like that. Okay. Irrespective of that, irrespective of those numbers, keep in mind the goal is to always manage your blood pressure correctly, in whatever manner is suitable. Loss of body weight, reduction of sodium in the diet, and of course for those folks that are in stage 2 in particular, stage 1, stage 2 hypertension, perhaps medication. Okay, so the next measurements that we're looking at are the anthropometry and body composition measurements. And those are basically just going to be body mass index, which is a calculation. It's just a calculation, and you have that there at 358. Circumference measurements, And the circumference measurements can be done in any number of ways, but the one circumference measurement that you really want to make sure you get is the waist circumference. So if you can only do one circumference that's going to help you understand risk factors, it's going to be the waist circumference. If you now add the hip circumference, waist to hip ratio, you actually have a clinical way of determining risk. And table 11.3 and 11.4 and 11.5 all are speaking to now not 11.5, but 11.3, 11.4 are speaking to risk stratification, right? Health risks and risk category. And those are important to know. These are the things that when you get this information about your client, it goes on paper, goes in the computer, however you're going to do it. The goal here is to use that the first time as a starting point. Now you can use this as people lose weight, as they lose inches, as they lose body fat, as their BMI goes down. All of these things are what you as a trainer are using normally on a 30-day. We recommend every 30 days, just do these assessments. If after 30 days, 60 days, your client sees the results of the training and the whatever nutritional changes they're making, you're gonna find you got a happy client, which will they'll probably stay longer with you. So you can do additional circumference measurements, the neck, the chest, you can do the thigh and the calf, because these are going to be indicative of muscle mass gain as well as fat loss. Of course, the next assessment that's critical is the Skinfold measurement to measure body fat. So for the most part, the body fat for the average, apparently healthy individual is going to be one of the key biometric measures you get, right? Because if you're doing well on your exercise routine, if you're eating well, you should be either gaining or maintaining lean body mass, hopefully gaining a little bit, but losing body fat. And if you're losing body fat, we can measure that through Skinfold measurement. Now, just keep in mind that the Skinfold, there's a number of Skinfold measuring protocols that you can use. And on page 364, you'll see basically the three biggies that are used. Now, don't get me wrong, there's other ways to take body fat, but this is just the Skinfold caliper method. It tends to be the method of choice right now because it's more accurate than other ways to do it, such as the handheld bioelectrical impedance devices, but it also takes some practice. So just keep that in mind. But the three main ways, or the three main protocols that are used are the Jackson and Pollock, which is 7 sites. So you're basically pinching 7 sites. The more sites that you take data from, generally the more accurate the assessment is going to be because you have more data points. The Jackson Pollock is a 3-site. It has less, right? It has less sites, 7 versus 3. It's generally not going to be as accurate for one reason and one reason only. It just doesn't have as many sites to take it from. You don't have as many data points. However, what's the trade-off? If I'm grabbing 7 areas on a client, that can be a little much versus 3. So there's a trade-off. 3 sites, 1, 2, not that bad. You know, my client is sitting there going, oh, geez, 7 sites might be a little bit intrusive. Now, that's a possibility. The other reality is that irrespective of 7 or 3, the level of accuracy is going to be based on the technician for the most part. If you're not good at this and you don't know how to you don't do it very well, it doesn't matter whether you do the 7 or the 3. It's going to be inaccurate. The sort of the midway, the in-between one, and the one that NASM recommends that you use is the Durnan Wormsley formula protocol, and the particular protocol 4 sites. So you get 1 more than 3, and it's good enough. It's really good enough especially if you're really good technically at doing it. Do not try to memorize table 1110. They're just giving you reference. Because remember, once you're actually doing this, you can use this book, the textbook, as reference. More than likely, you'll have something like this up on the wall so that when you do it, you can look really quick and get it. And so as you move into Skinfold assessment, considerations, concerns, now we talk about the other ways to measure body fat. And I said it before, the bioelectrical impedance. And there's any number of bioelectrical impedance devices now on the market. Some of them are really expensive, but pretty accurate. And you can spend $8,000, $10,000 for a really, really amazing bioelectrical impedance device where you take your shoes and socks off, you stand on it, you grab the handles, you lift them out to the side. It gives you body mass of each limb and blah, blah, all the bells and whistles. Or you can spend, $80, $90 on a handheld. What you lose with the cheaper device, of course, is accuracy. The other problem with bioelectrical impedance is that the participant has to be prepped. Participant has to be prepped. You can't drink water. You gotta, you've got to have, bare feet in some cases. Like I was saying, you have to be, in a right position. You have certain things that go along with using these devices. And so, although they're convenient in that sense, like the handheld bioelectrical impedance device, although it is convenient, there are some drawbacks to it. And so you need to make a decision as you decide which pieces you're going to use. Of course, what we call the gold standard is the hydrostatic underwater weighing. What's not listed in this chapter is the DEXA scan, which now has pretty much taken over as the most accurate way to measure body fat, but ain't nobody using a DEXA scan that I know of in a gym. Obviously, these are for clinical usage. They're just not designed for the average person, nor is hydrostatic weighing. But the measurements we get from Skinfold and bioelectrical impedance, the only reason we're able to calculate body fat from those is because of the data that we get or have gotten from hydrostatic weighing and DEXA scanning, because those are real live numbers. The other ones, body fat, bioelectrical impedance, are basic estimates, but they're numbers that are used are based off of the actual historical data we have from hydrostatic weighing. Now that you've done these assessments, and these don't require any energy expenditure, now you can move into those assessments that require some activity, right? Cardiorespiratory assessments now are going to help us to get a good idea or a bead on our potential client or our client's physical fitness level, right? So the first thing we look at is VO2 max. You're not going to determine true VO2 max of a client. Why? Because you have to go to a university or a clinic to use the actual equipment that goes along with measuring true VO2 max. And so that is the gold standard, however, just like hydrostatic weighing is the gold standard for body fat. Using a VO2 max method protocol at a university, for instance, that has all this equipment, that's the gold standard. Okay, that's where you've probably seen it. You got a guy in a treadmill, there's a crash cart, he's got this mask on his face and he's running on the treadmill. That's a VO2 max test, right? If you can get it done, it's really cool, by the way, if you can get it done, but we're not having clients do that, obviously. So what we have to do is instead we have to get assessment. We have to assess their cardiorespiratory fitness in other ways. Normally we do this with what are known as sub-maximal testing, submax. So I don't know what your VO2 max is, but let's just say it's here. If I can test you here and get you, I can make a prediction about what your VO2 max is going to be. That's what these are designed for, right? It's easy, simple, straightforward, relatively ininvasive, right? and we can get it done. And it provides a fair measure of accuracy, right? We're not doing a research article where we have to have exact numbers. We're dealing with clients who need to get some basic information, and then we see the change over time. So we have what's known as ratings of perceived exertion, right? And that's just, it used to be a scale between 6 and 20. We don't use that anymore, the 6 through 20 scale, 6 being, low intensity, perceived intensity, 20 being the highest. Now we use the basic 1 to 10. And basically, you're basically asking your client on a scale of 1 to 10, you tell me, where are you at as far as your physical exertion, right? If they're just really hurting, right, they're on a treadmill and they're just like breathing, they may say they're at an 8. On a scale of 1 to 10, I'm at an 8. Okay, that's good. Right now, I'm at a 1 or a 2 because I'm not doing anything. So on a scale of 1 to 10, ask yourself a question. Where are you on a scale of 1 to 10 right now watching this video? Are you ready to go to sleep? Are you just sitting there, or are you actively engaged? You're at a 1 or a 2, right? Lying down doing nothing is a 1. Maxing out, ready to throw up and die on the treadmill at a 10-degree angle, at a max pace, that's a 10. So that's what ratings of perceived exertion gives you. The normal testing that we will do for folks is going to be the YMCA 3-minute step test, and they give you an explanation using a box. You just stepping up and down at a consistent pace. You do it for 3 minutes, and you're going to take the heart rate when they're finished. One of the things to kind of keep in mind, and they're going to show you, NASM's going to give you the information here. You kind of give some preliminary test instructions. You want to make sure that the person is relatively warmed up. They could stretch out if they want. It's not going to make a difference. But the idea is that the individual is prepped, ready, and you tell them to go ahead and start stepping up and down. It's low intensity, moves into a steady state heart rate condition. You're timing it, right? And you would be guiding them. You tell them up, down, right, for 3 minutes. And as you time it, as soon as that 3 minutes ends, you have them step off and you take their pulse for 60 seconds. You take their heart rate for 60 seconds. Now, what they could do also is when they could just kind of just keep walking around a little bit. You don't want them to continue walking around. You want their heart rate to come back down. And what you're doing is you're basically measuring, as soon as they come off, what their heart rate, what their relative heart rate then is for 60 seconds. And you're going to write that down. The more fit an individual becomes, the more fit they become, the lower that ending heart rate is going to be, right? Because they're in better condition. Their heart doesn't have to work as hard. And it's the same movement pattern, up and down. It's not like they're holding 10-pound dumbbells. Okay, they're just up and down. Take their heart rate. An indication of getting more physically fit is a lower heart rate, or ending assessment heart rate. And that's a good one. The YMCA 3-minute step test is a good one. It's a standard. You can use that. You can basically, if you wanted to, you could use really anything. You could do a 3-minute submax test on a treadmill. You could do it, on a stationary bike, for instance. But the step test is used because it gets people's heart rate up significantly higher than you're going to get with one of those other pieces of apparatus. So that's why the step test is used. Doesn't impose a whole lot of issues or problems on your client. So it's a good one. The Rockport, and by the way, that test is used on average, quote, average apparently healthy individuals. When you have individuals that are really detrained, you'll want to use a less intense assessment, and that's going to be the Rockport walk test. And that's going to be a 1 mile. You do it on a treadmill normally, and you put them on the treadmill and you just have them walk for a mile, give them the instructions. And then basically all you're doing is you're just finding out how long it takes basically to complete 1 mile. So if you're doing it on a treadmill, for instance, you can have them, for instance, increase the speed. Once you set the angle, don't change the angle. it's speed. The question is how long does it take you to walk 1 mile? Remember the Rockport test, and I've said you can do it on a treadmill, but it was designed to be done on a track. It was designed to be done on a track because we want to find out how long it takes this individual to go from point A to point B. And we do it for those that are detrained because if the step test is too intense, that can be uncomfortable. But somebody that's really detrained and they can walk a mile, but maybe it's a little bit of a challenge. The Rockport test gives you a better a better way to assess somebody that's in really a detrained condition. So as you think about it though, as you get more fit, right? As my client gets more fit, how long does it take them to walk a mile? It takes less and less time because they're walking faster and faster. And so because they can do that, that means that their cardiorespiratory fitness level is getting better and better. They can do more. So that's what the Rockport test does. There's a 1.5 mile run test, basically the same thing, but we're doing this for individuals that are in well-conditioned scenarios. So same thing. I want to see how long it takes you to run 1.5 miles. This is what we did in the military, right? The 2-mile run. The shorter the amount of time, the faster you're going. The faster you're going is more indicative of being in better condition. So you're simply timing your client for a 1.5 mile run. So again, Rockport walk test, deconditioned, YMCA 3-minute step test, average, apparently healthy, and then the 1.5 mile run for more well-conditioned individuals. The talk test and ventilatory threshold, we spoke briefly about VT, but the whole point here of ventilatory threshold, and NASM does a really good job on pages 375 all the way through 377, really good job of explaining exactly what is expected during this submaximal test to find out where an individual's ventilatory threshold 1, and you're probably not going to do this, by the way, with the average client, ventilatory threshold 2. So the test itself is designed to find out where, we spoke about this in a previous chapter, where does the mix of substrate go from predominantly fat to 50-50 fat and glucose for muscle cell metabolism? Let me say that again. At a low intensity level, meaning I'm sitting down, I'm not doing anything, the predominant source of fuel for metabolic muscular activity is coming from free fatty acids, type 1 muscle fibers predominantly. As I start to increase my level of activity, right, and I start to become more active, I'm on a treadmill, I'm on a stationary bike, whatever the case is, I'm going to be using more of the fast twitch fibers. And so they tend to use glucose, right? Particularly the white type 2X fibers. As I require more and more of those fibers to come into use, my body is going to start using more and more glucose. At some point, there's going to be about 50-50 percentage, right? 90-10%, all the way to about 50-50, 50% fuel used from fat, 50% fuel used from glucose. That point is critical. That is a very important changeover point metabolically. And there's going to be a couple of correlations that occur at that point. The first one is going to be that your heart rate is going to correlate with that point. It's going to get to a certain point. It's going to be 120 beats per minute, 130, whatever that is. That's also going to correlate with a respiratory rate, right? Or the number of breaths you take per minute. It's going to correlate with a non-linear change. In other words, at that point, right, at the point where I get to this 50-50 usage of fat and glucose, my respiration rate, which is at 70 beats per minute, 75, 80 beats a minute, steady, right? 71, 72, it keeps going up and up and up. At that point where glucose and fat become equal in how ATP is being produced, there is a non-linear increase now. You see linear, right? Non-linear. There's this bump up. We have to breathe more than would be expected by that chart. I got to take more breaths. When that happens, we see this concurrent changeover in substrate usage and this breathing rate change. Whatever that heart rate is at that crossover point, that's what we call VT1, ventilatory threshold 1. It's a very important parameter to know, because when we're training people, research has shown that you don't need to train too far above your VT1, meaning heart rate wise. You don't need to train too far above that to get the benefits of cardiovascular training. In fact, what we try to do is get people to train just below VT1 or at VT. We'll get them to train higher and higher levels, but we're going to do that in a very specific way through intervals, things like that. So the whole point of ventilatory threshold, and I've drawn out the chart for you before, and it's just really important to keep in mind that the chart, don't get confused by it. Let me do this. I'm gonna use these. It's probably easier to see. Don't be confused by, this non-linear, linear explanation. So here's the chart. The linear breathing pattern, in other words, the number of beats, number of breaths per minute is going to go up if I continue to train at an increasing or consistently increasing level of intensity. So I start to breathe more, I breathe a little bit deeper, and then I start to breathe faster. But there's going to be a point, right, where when my usage of fat is at 50% and my usage of glucose is at 50%. So at that point, at the point where it's 50-50, that's where we have this crossover point at VT1. The line is no longer linear in what would be expected with the increase in breathing rate. It becomes kinked upward. And that's what we call a non-linear increase. Okay. So it's this increase, this additional need or additional increase in oxygen by the blood system for the working muscles. And that's where we see what we call ventilatory threshold, right? Threshold 1. And basically what that's telling us is that there's a changeover in the type of substrates that are being used to fuel the muscular activity. Again, why is this important? Because of the training zones. Zone 1 is below VT1, zone 2, VT1, VT2. So NASM, kind of to get back on track here with you, the VT1 and VT2, what we call field tests, are designed to give us a specific heart rate that we can tell people to train at or below, or in between or above. And they give a really good explanation of what you're going to do. Basically, you want an individual to get to a point where you can see a very clear, definitive change in their breathing rate. See, because I'm not going to take, blood from my client while they're training. I got to be able to see something externally that's going to give me a cue. Well, fortunately, there's a perfect cue when we see this happen. And the cue is in breathing and respiration rate. Normal respiration, right, is just like this. I can talk to you. This entire time I've been able to talk to you without having to go, okay, let me get back on track. Did you see that difference? When that happens, when that change, and I'm on a treadmill and I'm talking to you, A, B, C, D, E, and I can talk to you and I can do the alphabet, but as soon as I get to E, F, G, H, I, J, K, whoa, what just happened? What just happened? Well, there was a change in my breathing pattern. My body needed more oxygen. And when your body needs more oxygen, it takes a deeper breath or increases the frequency of breathing. I'm not going to say you're going to get this perfect right off the bat. But the key to remember here, the key component to remember here is that you can actually see it. You actually get pretty good at it. So when you have a client on a treadmill or a bike or whatever, you can actually watch and you can measure their heart rate. Again, this is why I like a heart rate monitor. If you got a heart rate monitor, you can measure. You can literally look at the heart rate monitor and go 115, 120 beats per minute, 120, 122, and they keep increasing a little bit on the speed, for instance, or the grade, whichever one. And then they're talking to you. Remember, they're talking to you this whole time. Just whatever you want to say, right? You can say the alphabet, you can pledge of allegiance, whatever. It's going to take, depending on the person, anywhere from 2 minutes, 3 minutes, all the way up to 5, even a little bit longer for a person to slowly, incrementally get to that point where they go, D is for dog, E is for eel, F is for frog, H, and what happened? When they went like that, what was their heart rate? Was it 125 beats per minute? 24? Give it a couple, let it go a little bit higher, and it might get up to about 128. Whew. Okay, and they still feel good, but you're noticing this little bit of a labor. It's not uncomfortable, but it's a little bit challenging, right? That's the heart rate I want. Don't try and get perfect. Don't try and get exact with it. You're not going to. You get close, and that's what you're trying to do. VT1, okay, gives you the test instructions. Again, VT2 is similar, but it requires the client to train at a fairly high level of intensity, and it's an intensity that they can maintain for 20 minutes. Again, these are field tests. You're doing the best you can. Okay, you're not going to get this perfect assessment. That's not what we're looking for. We're trying to figure out. It's not 150 beats per minute. It's 170. It's not 160. It's 180. That's a huge difference. So VT2 now tells us where the third zone is. Anything above VT2, that heart rate is going to be what we call zone 3. The research right now is telling us pretty clearly that you don't want to spend a whole lot of time in zone 2, which is between VT1 and VT2. You want to spend your time at VT1 or below, depending on the level of intensity that an individual can train at, and get more and more time at that intensity, and then jump in and out of zone 2. I don't want to get ahead of myself, but that's going to be your VT1 and VT2 test. Those are really critical assessments. It's going to help you to determine the programming that you start people with when it comes to cardio respiratory training. So that is the end of chapter 11. Again, go through your chapter review, look at your chapter highlights, make sure you understand VT, right? And make sure you understand the basic concepts behind the assessment and why you would do an assessment, because they're really very important in the real world once you're actually training people. So again, chapter 11 done. Look forward to seeing you in chapter 12.